We'd like to introduce ourselves as moderators, and then we would like to welcome from Mayor Jan Hill and Harriet Briette with the Chilkoot Indian Association. Frankie Pilifon and I will be the moderators for the 2 days. We're going to keep everybody on time and running through our agenda and helping everybody out there. We run a small company based in Juneau called Grassroot Associates, Grassroute. Originally we did trail and transportation work and worked on route work and we've worked with the Alaska Marine Highway. We've worked on rural tourism development projects and also have collective experience with natural resources management, minerals and mining included. And Frankie, before we proceed, did you want to say a word? No. Okay, so I've introduced the two of them. Welcome to the Haines School, and thank you, Haines School Borough, for use of the facility. Most of you entered through the foyer, the multipurpose cafeteria. That the restrooms are across the foyer from here. In case of a fire or emergency, you can proceed out the doors you came in, and then out from the foyer you can go out to the right, the back of the school, or out the front entrance where you likely came in. This is also an emergency exit to my left. The Haines School is a tobacco-free campus, so if you're going to smoke, you need to go across the street. And as far as, with no further ado, I'd like to welcome, we have... I'm sorry, this is Daniel Quinat. He's from Cornejo. Okay, Daniel Quinat is also going to provide a welcome. And would you like to start? Thank you.
Well, I'd like to introduce Kimberly Strong, the Chilkoot Indian Village President, for our welcome.
I'm going to introduce Daniel. I want to welcome everyone to the Chilkoot Valley. I'm Kimberly Strong, as Daniel said, of the Chilkoot Indian Village of Klukwan. I want to welcome everybody here, and I'm really glad. I like the introduction up there about communication and keeping that line of communication open to everyone and having a clear understanding of what it means for responsible development and economic development for our valley. And I want to just say that through the thousands of years that our people have lived here in the Chilkoot Valley, the community, the area has been able to sustain us. So when we talk about sustaining our economic wealth and livelihood, let's remember the valley can sustain livelihood, and it has for thousands of years. And I just want to express our appreciation to everyone who has come out here and will have a clearer understanding of mining, of development, and things that go along with that. Good appreciation again, and welcome to the Chilkoot Valley.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to apologize to Kimberly. I didn't see you. My name is Katsi Harriet Briette. I'm the travel administrator for the Chilkoot Indian Association. We share office space with Constantine, so we're in sort of a unique position to recognize the growth in the valley, economic growth, and we also have a fisheries department that works towards sustaining the fisheries and environmental issues in our valley. So this is always a little bit of a juggling act for us, because we want to make sure that one, people have jobs so that they can stay in our community, and two, people are able to fish and feed their families. And I feel like this forum is very important, and we're very pleased and proud to be a part of it. Welcome to the Chilkoot Valley, the Chilkat Valley, and looking forward to a good, productive week. Thank you.
Mayor Vic?
Thank you. My name is Jan Hill. I'm the mayor of the Haynesboro, and was also a part of the steering committee that put this together, and I would like to express my thanks to that committee. We persevered through disagreements, agreements, good ideas, bad ideas, better ideas, and here we are today. I want to welcome you all. Thank you for coming, and I'm sure we'll see more people drifting in and out throughout the weekend. There's a jam-packed agenda full of good speakers and good information. And so I know you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to the experts. This is going to be a very educational weekend for all of us, I'm sure. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to everybody that had any part of putting this together. It was a big job. And as we do in Haynes, it all comes together in the end, and you will have a good event this weekend. So welcome, thank you, and I look forward to visiting with you over the course of the next couple of days.
Thank you again. We would like to acknowledge the steering committee members and supporters who have brought the Chilkat Valley Mining Forum together, and I'm going to read them so I don't leave anybody out. But the Mining Forum is brought to you by the Takshanak Watershed Council, and thank you to the Watershed Council for stepping forward and putting together the forum and providing a forum for information exchange. But also the Alaska Miners Association, the Chilkat Indian Village, Chilkoot Indian Association, Constantine Metal Resources, the Haynesboro, Haynes Chamber of Commerce, the Haynes Sportsmen's Association, Lynn Canal Conservation, Haynes Gill Netter Association, the Palmer family, and the United Southeast Alaska Gill Netters. And so I would like to just get to know a little bit about who's here today. If you are a member of any of the supporting organizations, would you please stand up? Or if you're already standing, raise your hand. Well, again, thank you. Thank you for bringing us together. How about a show of hands if you're from Haynes? If you live in Haynes. Okay. Most of you here by this time on a Saturday. Thank you for coming. If those of you who are from Southeast Alaska in general,
Haynes is part of South.
Haynes. Is there anyone here from Canada or the Yukon? Okay. A couple. Okay.
It's the left one.
Oh, very good.
Russell.
There we go. So our goal, and we alluded to it a little bit, information exchange, is to develop a knowledge base in the community about mining and mine development in the Chilkat Valley Haynes area that will inform future discussion, analysis, and decision making. The focus of information is on mining in general and mining mineral resources in the Chilkat region, and the Chilkat Valley, which is certainly an extremely rich and variable ecosystem as well. So today and tomorrow, we will have in the mornings some presentations. This morning we have 4 presenters. And then in the afternoon we will be having questions. So as our speakers are presenting this morning, write down. We're going to have you write down questions, and we put Derek has put some forms in the back and sharpened a bunch of pencils for your questions. We have.
We need those by lunch.
And your questions, it will be helpful, and then at lunchtime, when we'll have all your questions in, thank you, we will sort through the questions, and in the afternoon, we'll present the questions to the speakers this morning, which will serve as a panel. So, presentations in the morning and a Q&A interaction in the afternoon is the way we'll proceed. And when you're filling out your question forms, it's helpful if you can see a particular category that you want to bring forward, or a specific presenter that you would like to address the question to, let us know. But your question might be one about the process and next steps for information gathering, or technical questions, economic, environmental, social, are some suggestions where you might categorize the general. Okay. We also have in the back some feedback forms that if you could get to us by tomorrow, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we'll hear from Russ White and Cindy Buxton this morning with the Lynn Canal Geological Services, and then Liz Cornejo with Constantine Metal Resources. And after the break, as you might know, we've had a couple of flight delays from Juneau, and so we have as I should have mentioned, and I think we'll bring the lights back up if we to at least a medium amount. We'll see. I know everybody can see the screen. I think we can do it a little more light and still be able to see the presentation. But it's fine. This is fine. So Russ White they're going first. Russ and Cindy, and we will hear from Jim Calvin with the McDowell Group tomorrow. So and then the order of the speakers has changed a little bit before lunch. So we're gonna, and then but Alan Nakanishi with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation and Kyle Moselle from the Alaska Department of Natural Resources will present as a team this morning after Kendra Zamzow, who is here, and Alan and Kyle are still weather dependent this morning, but they will be here. Either if they're not here this morning, we'll hear from them tomorrow. Okay. So Russ White and Cindy Buxton have been running a consulting business, creating 3D geologic models and resource estimates for numerous mining companies since 1996. Cindy has an MS in geology from the University of Washington. Her experience includes doing field mapping in remote Alaska, core logging, and creating 3D geologic models. Russ has a BS from Northern Arizona University and has worked in the mining industry since 1984, specializing in resource estimation of mineral deposits. He has experience with open pit, underground, and early stage projects across the Western Hemisphere. They have no association with the Constantine project, and they have lived in Haines full-time since 2007. So, Cindy is going to get us started on this presentation. Thank you. And one word about we'll have a little signal that indicates you have 5 minutes left. Because
So my name is Cindy Buxton. I'm going to do the first part of this presentation, and my husband Russ will do the second part. So our talk today is called Mining 101. We're going to give you an introduction to what happens on a typical exploration or mining property, and sort of try to give you.
Can everybody hear okay?
Try to give you an overview of the whole process, so that when you hear talks this weekend, or you read press releases from Constantine or articles in the newspaper, you can take that information and know where it plugs into the big picture. To do that, first we're going to talk about the stages of a typical mining project or exploration project, and we'll talk also about where Palmer is and where they're going next. Then we'll also talk about some key terms and concepts that you need to understand in order to understand where they're at, what they're doing next, why they're doing it, and how they're making their decisions. Some of those are very critical concepts that are not actually intuitive necessarily. And third, just to give you sort of a sense of what underground mining is like, we have made a little movie spliced together from various YouTube videos on the internet to show you what it looks like if you're underground and going through the tunnels. Constantine doesn't know what type of mining method they might use if they do open this as a mine, because they're not far enough along to know that. So what we're showing you is just one of the possibilities. So there's some key terms I need to talk about right away. One is mineralization. Mineralization is an enrichment in the minerals of economic interest in some rocks. That's different than ore. And the term ore is misused frequently. I'll try not to do it myself. But ore is mineralization of sufficient quantity and quality that it can be profitably mined and processed. It's the opposite of waste, which is the rock that you have to go through to get to that ore. I'm sure some other speakers will be talking about what happens with that waste. And the other main term right now is grade, which is a measure of the concentration of the elements or minerals that you're interested in. And it's expressed in either ounces per ton, or grams per ton, or percent, depending on what element you're looking at. Okay, so let's get to those phases on a typical exploration mining property. The first part is exploration. That's where Constantine is in their project right now. That's where most of my experience is, and Russ's as well. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. If they find enough to open a mine, the next stage is development. That's where they build the facilities. Build the mill, build the offices, the tailings dam or whatever they're going to do, the roads, all that kind of stuff. In that process, they'll do some permitting and some more planning before they actually do the construction. We won't talk too much about that stuff there. Then the next stage, if all goes well, is the mining stage. That's where they extract the ore and process it. And if they're lucky, and if they've done their plans correctly, then that stage pays for everything else. That's the only stage where they make money. The final stage is the closure, where there's reclamation and ongoing monitoring. And I'm sure somebody will be talking about that as well. Okay, so let's go back to that exploration. There's three main parts. It's sort of fluid. But in the first part, the main question they're trying to answer is there anything of interest? The second, and they have answered that. They do have something of interest. So they're now in the middle stage. The questions are, is there enough to make a mine? Is the grade high enough that they can afford to mine it profitably? And 3, what's the geometry? You have to know the geometry to know how you're going to mine it. And that affects profitability as well. And that's where the Palmer's project is now. And the last stage of the exploration is, can it be mined profitably? That's a whole different question than, do you have enough? And is it high enough grade? So the early stage, they're past this. They have had a fairly typical trajectory on this property. A prospector finds something, they go to a mining company or an exploration company, they get them interested, they come out. In Alaska, that usually means helicopter time. They take some samples themselves, they might drill some holes. Typically, you'll have several companies that come in, do some work, decide they're not up for the risk, they don't think it's going to be big enough, they walk away. Then the prospector may find another person. I believe they've had about 11 companies over about 30 years before the current partners. That's typical. Along the way, it's also very common to find investors or partners. This is a very expensive thing to do, to open a mine. They like to share the risk, they like to share the expense. And that's happened on this property too. The middle stage, they're answering the questions, is it big enough? Is it high enough grade? What's the geometry? So they continue to do lots of data collection, and then they compile the data into various forms so they can evaluate it. Here we go. So the middle stage, this is mostly about data collection and analysis. There's 3 main types of data that they're going to be looking at: the geologic data, the geotechnical data, and the environmental data. The geologic data, they'll do some continued surface mapping and sampling. They may do some geophysical studies using various geophysical tools to actually see down below the surface of the earth without drilling. They'll do some infill drilling and drilling to find the edges. How big is that body of mineralization that they found? Where are the edges? And then they'll also typically drill satellite areas. So you have some mineralization in an area, it's very common that it's popping up in a variety of places. So they may not be attached, but when it comes to making a mine, they may want to add those in to make it profitable. And usually on an underground property, they're going to need to do some underground exploration before they decide if they're going to mine or not. There's lots of information that you can gather by going underground, and drilling from the surface may not be enough to reach all of your ore body. The geotechnical data is also gathered during those same things, drilling and mapping, but it is, they need to find out how strong the rock is so that they know when they go into mine how stable it is, because they don't want anything falling in on people. And they gather the information about groundwater, water flow, various other factors. And the environmental data is not necessarily collected during all of those same steps above, but it's something that they start very early. Some of these studies, you need a lot of time to get the answers. So they start doing environmental studies right away. And they use that for the planning and the permitting. So Constantine has had some very significant challenges in this work. They have very challenging terrain. That's a drill platform up there. I think you can see it without me using this pointer. I can't see that.
There's the point.
Yeah, it's not working. Okay. So there's a drill platform they've put in by helicopter and then set up a drill, and then they need to bring people in and out for their daily shifts. There's another drill platform up higher. So Constantine has done a number of these holes. This is what a drill rig can look like. There's different sizes and types, but this is just a generic one here. That big rod that's at an angle there, if you can point to it, Russ, that is the drill rod. At the front of the lowest one of those is a drill bit that shows up there. The outside of that is all covered, or the front top of it is covered with diamonds. And so it spins very fast, and it makes a cylinder of rock through the center of that drill rig. This is what drill core, which is what it's called, can look like. This is from Constantine. This is one of their good areas. The brassy colored stuff is their mineralization, and you can see that a geologist has kind of drawn it. So when they get that core, they'll take it to a place like this. This is at Constantine. This is one of their photos. That you lay out the core in sequential order, and the geologist then takes lots of notes and measurements. These days, it's put directly into a computer. They gather information on how broken the rock is. That's another geotechnical. They figure out where they want to sample and send stuff off to the assay lab. Assaying is very expensive. You don't sample all of it. They're also collecting all sorts of other geologic data. I don't have a copy of one of their logs. Here's a copy of a log, one that used to be done on paper, if you guys remember what that is. This was done in the 1990s. Each column is a different type of data. So basically just showing that it's very intricate, very time-consuming, lots of information. At this stage, you don't know all of the things that are important in that rock. So you take more information than you probably need. You're trying to figure it out. You need lots of clues. You don't know even what are clues and what are unimportant clues. So Constantine has drilled 137 drill holes for a total of about 174,000 feet. Prior to them, there were 37 drill holes of 7,500 feet. These are some of their core shacks. This is a picture a few years ago. I'm sure they have more of them now. When they store their core, when they send it off to assay, they slice it in half and send half to the assay lab and keep the other half for future reference. So how do you know how much is enough drilling? 174,000 feet, 150 holes or so. That's
that builds this, and then you can see through it to see the drill holes, and you see that there's been an ore body that's modeled underneath it. So I'm going to go back to the plan view here, and then I'm going to cut off the left-hand side. This vertical line is a section line like Cindy showed on that other example. So if I just cut off the left-hand side so we can look under it, I can spin that around and look under the surface. And there are the drill holes. And here's the ore body shape here. And if I zoom right in on it, I can look inside of that ore body shape. And the brightly colored parts of the drill holes are the higher grade portions. You can look inside of it and see other drill holes that are inside of that shape. So now I'm going to go back to a plan view, map view, and that we're going to do a cross section just like Cindy showed on that other example. So on this section line, we're going to look at a window. In this case, it's 30 meters either side of the window, and that's what that looks like in the plan view. And I'm going to rotate that view around so we're looking at it in cross-section view, like that. So here's the drill holes, here's the intercepts that they've included in the ore body, and then I can actually step through this to each individual section that are at 60-meter spacings with a 30-meter window each side. And you can see how the shape changes from section to section. As they get to the end, they have very little data, and then it pinches down to nothing. So now I'm going to step through back the other way, and you can just see how the shape changes based on the information they got from the drill holes. So that's how these shapes are built. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is a block model, which, like Cindy pointed in that other example, I'm going to go back to that cross-section view now. So the block model, basically we've carved up the ground inside of that shape into little cubes. In this case, they're 2-meter cubes. And we've estimated the grade for each one of those cubes. And this deposit is similar to the Constantine in that it has multiple elements. So we have a database, basically the block model is a database where for every one of these cubes you're tracking different values. Gold, silver, zinc, and copper. And then those grades are combined, we'll talk about that later, into an NSR dollar value. So the color code is based on the dollar value. And the ones that are red and purple and pink are the higher dollar value ones, and the ones that are blue and green are lower dollar value ones. So I'm going to get out of the demo here, and I'll go stand at the podium, and I'll try to tell you about the rest of this talk. Once I get back in there. I'm taller than Cindy. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of that example we looked at.
Is it
Go to
advancing?
the next
Yeah,
slide.
go to the next slide.
This is, doesn't seem to be working. So there it is with the block model showing in this slice. Go to the next one. So what is a block model? It's a database of discrete 3D cells which each represent a specific volume and a number of attributes. Metal grades, density, rock codes. There's all sorts of things you can track through here, including the confidence of how confident you are in the estimate of the grade that you have based on the distance to drill holes. All sorts of things that you can have in there. These are some important terms I'm going to talk about that relate to block models and the tabulations that are derived from them. So resource is the first one, and this is clearly defined in what's called the National Instrument, or NI 43101, Standards of Disclosure for Mineral Projects. This is a Canadian regulation that anybody that is traded on a Canadian stock exchange has to follow these regulations and these terminology. So I've got all these, this looks fairly complicated, but that's actually paraphrased from the actual document. Basically what it means is that a resource is a volume of material for which you have a reasonable prospect for eventual economic extraction. And it has to be estimated or interpreted from specific geologic evidence and knowledge, including sampling. You can't just go map the surface and say, oh, this probably extends 300 feet down, so I have a resource, and then you have to actually go sample it to see that it actually goes there. Another term I will talk about a lot is a cutoff grade. And if we look at the picture here on the left, again, this is color-coded like that other example we looked at. The warm colors are higher grade than the cool colors. And depending on what cutoff grade you think is going to be the economic cutoff for what you use, you'll use, to look at a resource, you just tabulate the blocks that are above a cutoff grade. So if your cutoff grade includes the yellow and the orange and red, then you count all the blocks in here that are yellow, orange, and red, and that becomes your resource. If you have a higher cutoff where you don't include the yellow, then your cutoff would just include the orange and pink and red ones. So the cutoff grade, in this case, this is just a gold deposit, so the cutoff grade is a simple gold grade. But because of the multi-elements at Constantine, they will use an NSR for their cutoff grade.
Next slide.
And an NSR is a net smelter return, and that's just a dollar value calculated for each block based on the grades of the different elements. So you take the grade of that element, you multiply it by the price of that element and the recovery, because even though you may have 2 ounces per ton of gold in rock, by the time you process it and mill it and mine it, you might only get 1.5 of those ounces out of the rock. So your recovery is never going to be 100%, but hopefully it will be better than 59%. Anyway, you multiply those out to get the value for that element, then you add up all the values from the different elements to get an NSR. Some other important terms are the categories of resource. The important distinction is between inferred resources and indicated and measured resources. The inferred resources, you have a lower confidence that they're really there. You've done some drilling, you know there's mineralization there, but you your drill spacing is too wide to be able to say that it's continuous between your drill holes. That's the stage that they're at Constantine right now. They have lots of drill holes, but they're relatively far spaced because they had to drill from surface and they're really long holes. It's really expensive to drill those holes. So they don't have the confidence that that stuff is continuous. The confidence level depends on the drill spacing, the continuity of the mineralization, and the nature of how broken it up it is, all sorts of things. Here's a tabulation from the 2015 Constantine report. It shows the resource, the inferred mineral resource listed at a bunch of different cutoffs. The reason they do that is because to be considered economic or have a reasonable expectation of being extracted, you kind of have to know how much it's going to cost to get it out and to mill it. And since they don't have a mining method picked out, they don't even have a processing method picked out, those are just sort of guesses. So they list it at different ranges so that you have a range that you can guess what cutoff we might use. And these are the dollar values that we used for this calculation for the NSR. And that was in 2015, now it's October 2017, the values are a bit different. Usually when you do this for a 43101 report, you want to be a little bit conservative because you never know what the price is going to do within the next year or two. So how does Constantine get from inferred to an indicated resource where they have more confidence? They do more drilling. How much drilling is enough? And do they need to go underground? Well, how much drilling is enough? Here's the same example. We've got the simple case with little drill holes. As you add more drill holes, the picture gets more complicated. It might get more complicated like this. Or it might even get more complicated. You don't know whether you have this scenario or this scenario. These both have the same drill holes, but it's two different interpretations of what might be there. And you don't know until you either do a lot of drilling or you go underground with a tunnel to see what it really looks like underground. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so now we have a little cartoon here. We've got these 4 drill holes and we've got different interpretations of what they look like. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a very conservative geologist interpretation of what the mineralization looks like from those holes. Go to the next one. Slightly more optimistic. One more. That's the optimistic geologist. One more. We get more and more optimistic as we go along. One more. And then you start bringing in people that have to model this stuff with their own interpretation. Go to one more. The geophysicist thinks things are even more continuous. And one more. They use our software to model it and do all of it. Some people will do things like this. And one more. If you're used to doing stuff with an open pit, then you just say take the whole thing. And one more. This is just a fancy statistical way of predicting things where things are, even though you don't have any data on them. And then the last one is the mining engineer's interpretation. So, okay. So why do we go underground during exploration? To get a better platform for drilling, to get better locations for where you can put your drill hole collars. You can get closer to your ore body, and you can drill fans of data from a single place that will give you a lot more information. It's logistically easier than having to haul everything up with a helicopter every day. You just go in and leave it there. And you can target specific parts of your mineralization by driving the tunnel to where you need it to be. And it gives you the excavation to actually see what the mineralization looks like. It's a lot easier to see what the mineralization looks like if you have a 15-foot high face to look at instead of just a 3-inch piece of core. Okay, so the next term I'm going to talk about is reserves. And in order to mine something, if you're going to develop a mine on something, you actually have to have reserves. So this is again from the NI 43-101 Canadian regulations. I'll paraphrase. So the reserve is the economically mineable part of the mineral resource. The reserve, you have to have a general idea that it's economic, but this part, you need to actually know that it's mineable. And you determine that it's defined by studies at pre-feasibility or feasibility level that are appropriate, and they include application of what are called modifying factors. And I'm going to talk about that more. In order to find out what the modifying factors are, you basically need to do a feasibility study and do a lot of detailed study to figure out what's actually mineable. So these are the parts. In the late stage of exploration, we're going to talk about feasibility study and go through these other terms here as well. So the feasibility study, we're doing environmental studies, baseline studies, and those actually started earlier. But then you'll come in and do bulk sampling and do metallurgical studies. That's going to tell you what kind of rock you have, what it's going to take to get the elements out of it, how expensive it's going to be to process it, what kind of mill you would need to build. You'll have to do detailed studies on building infrastructure and how much that's going to cost. You'll look at different mining methods and see how much those are going to cost. You look at processing methods, how much it costs to recover it, how much it costs to build the mill. And then you also consider all the social, governmental factors, environmental factors, all the other factors that are built into this to figure out how much it's going to cost to build a mine. Then you come up with a mine plan. This is just one example of a type of a mine plan called transverse long hole stoping. So you start with a mineralized envelope, you estimate the block grades in the envelope, then you have the block grades, and then you come in and you design what's called a stope over over the blocks. And this method here uses what's called primary and secondary stoping. They build the primary stopes, they take out the red ones or the primary ones first, and then they backfill them all, and then they take out the ones in between. And part of the mine plan is you also have to figure out where all the tunnels you're going to drive that support the building these stopes are. So again, a stope is just a name for the area where you're taking out mineralization. Here's a long section view of a different view of a different deposit where they've decided they need to build stopes in this size, shape, these blocks right here. But they can only afford to mine the orange and red blocks. They can't afford to mine yellow blocks. So the ones that have X's in them will all get left behind. They're not part of the mine plan. So the orange and red blocks in here are going to become the resource, the reserve. And the ones that are left behind, because they're in the orange and red blocks that are in the panels that have X's through them, those will not become part of the reserve, but they will remain as part of the resource. So the measured and indicated resource tons and grade within the mine plan are converted to proven and probable reserves. Measured and indicated resource blocks outside of the mine plan are still reported as resource. That's what it said on that last slide. The inferred resources may not be included in reserves because we don't have enough confidence in them. And for reporting purposes, inferred resources may never be combined with measured and indicated. It always has to be reported separately because you can't build a reserve on it. So this is a chart that sort of explains that. So mineral resources, this is from the exploration results. They're in three categories: inferred, indicated, and measured. The indicated and measured can be used to build a reserve, and then the indicated portion will likely be called probable, the measured portion will likely be called proven. So they have different terminology for reserves than they have for resources. And the way they convert from one to the other is you determine which part is feasible to mine by looking at all of these modifying factors. Okay, so you can sort of look at the resource reserves as you're going to go fishing. So an inferred resource is, you know the lake is there, it has good habitat for fish, and the right kind of fish are found in similar lakes. You've seen some, but you don't know how many or what type. You don't really have any idea if you can catch them or sell them, you just know that there's some there. Indicated resources, you've got a better idea of how many, what size, and what kind of fish, and you've taken measurements from shore, from a small boat. You haven't actually caught any yet, but ballpark calculations indicate you have good reason to believe you could catch and sell the fish for profit. But you can't raise money to buy a fishing boat without more information and proof. Probable reserves, you figured out what kind of gear you need and what it would cost to operate the gear. You've got a good idea of how many and what size and what kind. You're certain you can catch the fish and make a profit. Proven reserves, you've done enough working calculations that there is no doubt you can catch these fish with the gear you planned. You've actually caught a few, and you're confident that you're going to make money with your fishing operation. Not a perfect analogy, but I can sort of relate. Next slide, please. So once you've got a reserve, you've done your feasibility study, your mine plan, your reserve, you have a feel for what you have in the ground that you can mine. So then the question comes up, should you develop a mine? If it's clearly profitable, considering all of the costs and factors, then they can make the decision, yes, we'll develop a mine. If it's marginally profitable, what do? You go back and do more exploration, try to add reserves and make it more profitable, or you wait for a price increase or some other economic change, or you sell it to another property that's more optimistic about it than you are. If it's clearly unprofitable, then you might write it off and walk away. So here's a couple of examples of other properties that have gone through these stages. So the AJ mine it's a historically mined property under the mountain right next to Juneau. It was mined from the 1800s up until 1944. It was mined when they had very cheap labor costs because they could hire Chinese workers for $1 a day to sort ore. They can't do that anymore. And they mined the sweet spots out of it anyway. So after doing years and years of study and feasibility studies, they finally decided it wasn't worth mining and they walked away from it. And that was Echo Bay that did that. Kensington Mine, they did feasibility studies and they came out kind of marginal in the late 90s, and they also had permitting issues they had to get through. And as they were getting through their permitting issues, the price of gold went from $400 an ounce to $1,800 an ounce, and it became profitable, and the timing worked out that they were able to start the mine. Another project in Ontario called the Phoenix Project, they were in a well-known district that they thought they knew how everything worked pretty well, so they sort of skipped the feasibility study. They went to mining too soon, and their mine plan failed. They thought they had nice continuous ore, and it turns out they didn't. Their stock price dropped through the floor, went from several $100s to 16 cents a share. It's not good for the company. So this is why you want to know what you've really got in the ground before you start mining. A few things to note. From our observations, Constantine is doing the work to very high standards. It is a long process. They are nowhere near the decision whether to mine or not to mine. Constantine cannot yet accurately predict when they will finish a feasibility study or make a decision to mine or not to mine, because they don't know what they're going to find. They've still got a lot of drilling to do. It all depends on what they find. And Constantine has partnered with Dowa, which somewhat changes the picture because Dowa is a Japanese smelter company that has a smelter that is hungry, so they could probably mine at a slightly lower profit margin just so that they can feed their smelter. So we've talked about exploration and whether we could come to the decision to develop the mine. If you do make the decision to develop the mine, we're going to look at a couple of mining scenarios just so you can see what got here. And I'll see if I can drive my mouse and start this animation. Oh, I actually have sound. So this is just showing they've got a near vertical ore body, they're driving a drift out to it, and they're going to mine it in slices like this. This is called cut and fill mining. This is a fairly expensive way to mine, but it's very flexible. If you have a very squirrely ore body that's not very predictable, this is the way you want to do it. They drive a drift out to the ore body, and then they start blasting out on a level to take out that slice of the ore body. Then they come in and they fill that slice back up with paste fill, which uses waste rock. And then they ramp up to the next level and mine part right above what they just mined out. You probably want to hit the mute button on that, or you'll get the wild music on the next section. This is just pieced together from a bunch of YouTube videos. Some of them think that punk rock really helps show what rocks look like. Anyway, they mine out the different levels. They mine up. They'll go to the next level. Here's some details showing how this works. This piece of machinery is called the jumbo drill. It has two arms. We'll see that a little bit later. They drill the holes. They fill the holes with explosives and they blast it. Then they bring in a thing called a LHD, which stands for load, haul, dump, and they scoop it up. They load it. They haul it out, and then they dump it. Then, depending on the competency of your rock, you may have to do what's called ground support, where they put in rock bolts that help hold up the sides and the back. The ceiling in a mine is called the back. So then they're mining out the level. It's hard to see that, it's kind of dark. As they mine out each level, they can actually come in at a different place in the mine. It's one advantage of this method is they can mine at different places on the same ore body at the same time, so they can increase their productivity and be mining from more than one spot on the same ore body. There's other methods where they mine between levels more quickly. If you've got a very predictable ore body, it's called long hole mining. Anybody has questions about that, they can ask me afterwards. We're going to go into another demo here, just showing more detail about how some of this works. I might just skip ahead a little bit. So here's a scoop hauling up to what's called an ore pass. So an ore pass is just a vertical opening through the rock that dumps down to a level where you have trucks that haul the rock out so that you don't have to haul it all the way out with this LHD. The other way you can do it is you can haul with the LHD just up to a bigger transfer area where you load into a truck. And we'll see an example of that here in a minute. So this is just an example. So they're doing drilling and loading holes and hauling. They've got lots of activities going on, so they keep their equipment optimized work. This is just an example of what it's like driving through an underground mine. It's dark. You can't see very well in the picture, but along the back of the ceiling, all the utilities are hung from the ceiling. That's where you have your water lines, your power lines, your compressed air lines, your ventilation, all goes along the ceiling, so it's out of the way of things driving back and forth. Here's one of those jumbo drill rigs. It's drilling holes. Here's a time lapse of it drilling holes very quickly. So it's drilling holes in the face. And then this will be loaded with explosives. But this is part of the equipment that does that work. So it's drilling holes that are about 8 feet deep, and they'll blast out another 8-foot round of this tunnel, and the tunnel will go 8 feet farther than it did before they did this. And the process that they do for underground mining is called drill, blast, and muck. So they drill it, they load it with blasting material, and then they muck it out. So this is just an example showing the pattern that they drill. They put in a booster, which is what sets off the explosives. And then this guy is going to put a hose in there that loads bulk explosives into the hole. It pumps it full of explosives. Then they set off the blast, and it breaks all the rock, and they come in and muck it out. This is just an animation of the mechanics of how that works. They have everything timed just right, so the middle part blasts first, and then the outer part blasts second, so it has a place to go. And here's an animation of how that all breaks the rock. and then they use the LHD to scoop it out and haul it to the surface, or they haul it to a truck. The people that sell these LHDs and trucks were a good source for these YouTube videos. So here's an underground haul truck. Everything built for underground has got a very low profile. So here's the LHD dumping into the truck. Sorry, it's kind of dark. It is underground. And then the truck hauls the material to the surface to go into the mill. And it doesn't matter which mining method you use as far as the development, the building the tunnels to get to it, it's all going to go in the same general way. Okay, so that's it for the mining video. So now I'm going to give you a quiz from our Mining 101 class. Okay, what is ore? Remember, you have to be able to mine it for a profit to be ore. It can't just be high-grade mineralization. You have to be able to mine it for a profit. What is a resource? It's a general volume that you've defined with drilling that is in general should be profitable to mine. What is a reserve? It's the part of the resource that actually is mineable when you put a mine plan on it. And when will Constantine determine if the Palmer Truck project will be developed into a mine? Who knows, exactly. All right. That's all we've got.
Russ and Cindy, I want some of those cartoons for my own personal use, especially the Mickey Mouse one. I'm a geologist. I've spent 8 years at Red Dog Mine, which is open pit, so it's always fun to see what's going on with new information for underground. We have, and that was information rich, by the way, so I'll probably have to settle on you for a while. Our next speaker is Liz and Canal, and I'm going to introduce her real quick while they're switching out the computer there. Liz, which many of you may know her already if you're from Haines, she's Vice President of Community and External Affairs for Constantine Metal Resources. She holds a master's degree in earth science and has been contributing to the Palmer Project through exploration, project management, permitting, and relationship building since 2009. So please welcome Liz and listen carefully. I'm sure she's got a lot of good information for us to match up there with Russ and Cindy's. Thank you.
We will give this a try. A little shorter here. And I guess we're a little behind schedule, guys. Is it okay? It's still 45 minutes for this one? We can hang in there? All right, let's do it. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Cindy and Russ, for putting together that awesome presentation, because I think it will now lead really well into what I'm going to present to you today. I will try to maybe tone down some of the technical I was going to put in so we can kind of mix it up a little bit for everyone, but you guys know where to find me. I'm around to help add some more detail later. So I'm going to switch it up. Some of you have seen my presentations in the past. I've added some new things in, and you might be looking at the slide and wondering what is this? We've never seen this slide before. This is not Haines. So I'm going to start off a little bit differently and not talk about the Palmer Project. I'm going to talk about me for a little bit and just let you know a little bit of my history and where I came from, because I didn't grow up in mining. I didn't really know anything about mining until after university. And it all started for me here, which is a little gold mining town in Brazil. And I spent a year as an exchange student there after high school. And I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, farmland everywhere. My parents had nothing to do with mining. My mom's a nurse, my dad's a city planner, and didn't really even think about it. And then as I was traveling around Brazil, Brazil has a lot of mines and a lot of really rich mining history. And so I traveled a year around there and got interested in maybe taking geology in university and becoming a geologist. And even then when I took geology, I didn't think I'd come into mining, but I did. So that was 20 years ago when I was in Brazil. And fast forward, this is 2009. This is the first day I stepped foot in Haines. And you can see we drove down the Haynes Highway, stopped on the river there, and looked across the valley, and the mountain in the background there is where the mineral deposit is now located. And so that was, again, 2009, several years ago. I didn't know that this would become a big part of my life and a big part of my career. But over the last number of years, I've really learned a lot about the project, but also a lot about Haynes. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone here who's really opened the door to me and to the project to help us build the foundation for moving forward. And over my career, I've worked a lot here in Haynes, but I've had the opportunity, this is me working underground. I've run drill programs, working underground in an exploration project. I've had the opportunity to travel the world and tour. This is a large, very, very large open pit mine in Indonesia to see how other places work on things. Just skip the slide there, but that was a barge camp. I got an opportunity to live in a logging barge camp and doing exploration from there and another place in southeast Alaska. This is, oh, there it is. That was my first experience in Southeast in 2007 and 2008. I worked down in Prince Wills Island. And this is Northern Ontario. I've also worked in the north. This is minus 40-degree weather, working on a lake. Those are ice roads that I learned to build and learn how to operate drill rigs on ice and drill through lakes. And that was another interesting experience. And this is a mining town in Northern Ontario. Timmins, they have lots of active mines. I got an experience of working several years in Ontario in a community where there are several First Nations. There are several small towns. There's a lot of industries there. There's logging, there's fishing, there's snow machining, and a lot of active mines right in town. Some of them are open pits, some of them underground, and I got an idea of what it's like to live in a mining town. But I've also done more than geology in my experience. Slow down? Okay. I'll do my best. And this is, I got an opportunity to work also on our environmental programs. And so working with all of our consultants and learning about water quality, fisheries, wildlife, hydrology. This is up top on the mountain where we're working. These are some of our biologists doing some bird studies. And I got to go camping with them for the night and learn how they make their observations. I also get to be involved in the financial aspect of the industry and learn how the stock market works and where the financing comes from and how the businesses are developed. And so this is one of the investment conferences that we go to. And part of the job that I really love, and which is why I'm doing what I'm doing today, is working with communities. And this is Waukesha First Nation in Northern Ontario, where they have built core logging facilities and core storage facilities, and we work with them to train up some folks and restore our drill core from Ontario in their facility now. And I spend a lot of my time now doing community meetings, and my main role right now is to help make sure everyone's informed of what's going on, and there's always new information. So each drill hole that we do, each study that we do, each change in the industry, there's something new about the project, and so I hope to keep spending time with everyone, keeping you up to date with what's going on, but also listening to everything that you're interested in so I can bring that back to our project. So having said all that, I've worked in exploration now and mining for a little while, and everything I learn about the mining industry, I love it more. And everything I learn about the project here in Haynes and the community here, I get more excited about the possible future of the project. So now we'll start to talk about the Constantine Palmer project. This is a shot of the mountain up Glacier Creek, you can see, and piles of drill core, which Cindy and Russ explained well, is where we get our information right now. And that's the main aspect of our operation right now, is gathering data from drill core. So for me, coming from a geology background, when I look at the mountain and the deposit, I see minerals. I see a mountain full of copper, zinc, gold, silver, and barite. There's several minerals in there that are of interest to us. And when I also look at it, I look at it in the potential mining style. I see, oh hey, this could be mined with underground mining methods. This could produce a mineral called sphalerite and a mineral called chalcopyrite, and from that they could be processed into the elements of copper and zinc. And copper is something that the world uses for pipes and wires and all electrical things, but also the modern electrical things like electric cars and wind turbines. And then sphalerite is a mineral that gives us zinc, and the main use for zinc is to galvanize things and to prevent rusting for guardrails and fences and boat anodes. And you'll see, I threw up here, I doubt you can read it very well, but at the very bottom there's fine print. That's the kind of fine print that just explains what Cindy and Russ just presented, all the technical detail behind the number. So when I say I have a mineral resource that's inferred, it's 8.1 million tons large, it grades 1.4% copper, 5.25 zinc, 31 grams silver, 0.3 gold. All those numbers come from what they just described of that detailed process calculation, and then the fine print below qualifies that statement because we're making estimates based on certain metal prices, certain NSR cutoffs. And so when you see that fine print, it's just an indication of it comes from a larger document with those details that everyone uses to analyze where the project is at. So I'll spend a little bit of time today talking about the geology, but I also want to look at the project in another way and look at it as how can we make this a project that is good for the environment, and protective of the environment. How can we make this a project that is going to help a community diversify and prosper, and what can everyone else get out of this deposit as well? So we have a deposit, we've also got a larger property that we're exploring, and we often refer to this as a district scale area where there's the potential for multiple deposits. And I'll go into the geology a little bit to help explain how that may affect the future of our exploration in this project. So I just wanted to take a little step back as well and talk about this project in terms of all mines or all mining projects, because one thing that's important is that no deposit is the same, no environment is the same, no community is the same. And so where does the Palmer project fit in this big spectrum? So first off, deposits and mines can vary in size. They might be a small mine or a large mine. They might vary in grade, how rich is it, what types of metals, and the methods, the production, and all of that is determined by the geology. So for size, mines like Greens Creek and Kensington, they produce ballpark 2,000 tons per day of material they're moving around. That might seem like a lot of material, but other mines in the world, they move 300,000 tons per day of material in large open pit mines. So relative, you've got smaller operations when they're underground mines like Greens Creek and Kensington. And then grade, you've got some mines that are producing rock that is perhaps 8% copper, and they're making a profit. You've got other mines that are producing at 0.2% copper and making a profit. And it all depends on the size and how they remove it and how they can process it. Metals, we've got two major types. There's precious metals mines, which are gold and silver, higher value minerals, and base metal mines, copper, zinc, that are lower value metals. And they, because the price is different versus $1,700 an ounce versus $3 a pound, you're going to have different economics for how you're going to produce that and move that. And mining method, like we mentioned, open pit, underground, or even placer mining. Placer is the gravel mining of the gold nuggets. Production rates we mentioned can be hundreds of thousands of tons per day or a few thousand tons per day. And mine life is also something that you can that can vary, and often you'll start with a plan for maybe a 10-year mine life, and through exploration you'll continue to find more mineralization and maybe extend it into a 50-year mine life or a 100-year mine life. And often, if you find more mineralization, it may not change your rate of production, it'll just extend the mine life. In other scenarios, if you find more mineralization, you may end up boosting the production rate to get more out in a given period of time. And then, very important to all of this is the natural environment. What kind of weather is around? How rainy is it? What kind of rocks are you working in? Is there mountainous terrain? Is it flat terrain? All of those factors go into a mine plan because it will, not only the geology determines things, but your natural environment, as well as your location. Are you 200 miles from a road system, or are you on a road system, or far from power? Is there potential for adding power to the grid or not? Those things all determine the future of exploration projects. So, going back to the Palmer project, where do we sit? It's high grade. So we're looking at something that's not 0.2% copper, we're looking at something that's 2% copper. So orders of magnitude richer is what's called a high grade deposit. And those are amenable to underground mining methods when you've got the right geometry and topography, which is a smaller footprint. It's more selectively mined versus mining in a bulk method. Metals, we've got a mixture of metals, like Cindy Russ mentioned. So the bulk of the deposit, though, is copper zinc. It's really a base metal copper zinc deposit. There's a bit of gold and silver, but it's kind of an added bonus. It's not a gold-silver mine. So mining methods, we're looking at something that would be amenable to underground with a production rate that would be similar. This type of deposit is often mined around the world at maybe 1,000 to 5,000 tons per day. These are generally smaller mines that are higher grade. So that's where the Palmer project sits in sort of the bigger spectrum that I wanted to outline before we move on. The other thing I wanted to do is spend a little bit of time going over some of the geology. And I'll make it a little brief because we've heard a lot of technical information right now, but the geology really does drive everything for the project and all of the plans and the studies. And so I thought I wanted to explain a little bit of how this particular deposit formed. And so this type of deposit is called a volcanogenic massive sulfide deposit, or VMS for short. It's a category of deposits that is common. And they're created on the seafloor. And so the deposit that's now up in the mountains 200 million years ago was formed on the seafloor off in the Pacific Ocean. And imagine, if you will, underground, underwater hot springs. So you've got hot fluid circulating around. And what happens when you've got hot, salty ocean seawater that's being heated up by a magma source that's lower, and it's circulating through the fractures of the ocean floor rock, it starts moving elements around. And that's the main driving force for mineral exploration, is you look for a process that's going to move minerals around and concentrate them in another area. So this is a very complicated diagram, but I don't know if I have a pointer, but the basic premise is it's a slice through the ocean floor. You're looking at like a slice of cake. The top blue part, that's your seawater. You can see little fishes swimming. And the red bits. Okay, there we go. The red bits here would be the mounds of mineralization forming on the seafloor. But there's a lot happening below the crust. And so you've got this, what they call an intrusive rock or a magma body, a hot bit of rock that's heating up water. And as the water circulates through, it moves things around. So it strips certain elements. So in this area, we're losing copper, losing zinc, losing iron, but we're gaining silica, calcium, and sodium. All of this is moving around. The copper and the zinc are being deposited up here. There's adding magnesium here. We're losing sodium here. There's a lot moving around. And so as a geologist, we use these changes in elements to help us find where everything's now been concentrated. Because all seafloor rocks have a little bit of copper, a little bit of zinc, a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, but not in a concentrated amount. And so there's a geologic process that concentrates it for us and builds a mineral deposit. So that's what's happening on the seafloor at the time of the formation of the deposit. And so you can think this type of deposit forms in layers. You've got the seafloor where the water is circulating, doing things, and then you've got the surface of the ocean where the minerals are being deposited, and then you're going to have whatever comes and covers it up. So there's basically three different rock types: what we call the ore horizon, or where the minerals are, what's below it, and what's above it. So this process is happening all the time. It's happened for billions of years. You've got some deposits of this type that are billions of years old. You've got some that are forming today on the seafloor of the South Pacific, actively forming new deposits. And this is a map of the world highlighting where these deposits are concentrated. And so these VMS deposits or districts, they're major sources of zinc and silver in the world, and they're also important sources of copper. And you can see that they form all over the world, but in certain concentrations. And so West Coast, North America has a lot of these. The Canadian Shield is full of them. Scandinavia, Sweden and other areas are full of these deposits. There's some through Europe and the Middle East. And then Southeast Asia, and a lot in Japan, which really helps explain also where some of the expertise comes from, as well as where these companies are coming from that are able to explore and operate these mines. There we go. And this is a graph of some of these various deposits, and on this side we're looking at the size. So these would be small ones, these would be large ones. And then we're looking at grades. These would be low grade ones, these would be high grade ones. And so VMS deposits in the world have they vary in size and grade, and they cluster around here. So where does Palmer fit? The red ones are highlighted, these are the US ones. And here you can see number 10, Greens Creek. That's over here. It's pretty large and it's pretty rich. It's a great mine for the area. Where does Palmer sit right now? We have about 8.8 million tons, so we're just about here. Our grade, if you add in the copper and the zinc, we don't have any lead. We're around here, so we're kind of in the middle of the lot as far as VMS deposits around the world. And we're still exploring, so we hope to get bigger and maybe higher grade. This is a map of Alaska, showing some of these deposits as well. This is all from a USGS publication. So you've got some VMS deposits up here, Arctic Bornite, Ambler District up here. There's a lot all across Alaska, but a lot in Southeast. And Southeast is really known for this type of deposit. There were some that were operational mines in the early 1900s, and there's some, like Greens Creek, that are currently being operated, and there may be more mines in the future. And looking at the lower 48, you've also got certain concentrations in California. Blue Moon is one where my boss Garfield worked at for a while. Wisconsin has a large number of these. Flambeau is one that was recently mined and reclaimed, a lot through the east there. So they're pretty common, they're all over. They all have a little bit of different style and size, but they generally give us metals in high concentrations, and they're relatively small, high-grade operations. So going back to Palmer and looking at our property here, this star represents our mineral resource. It represents these red lines represent areas of rocks that are interesting to us, that might represent the old seafloor where you might have more deposits forming. And the dots on here represent areas where we prospected, where we hiked up on the mountain and banged off a rock, and it has some high-grade mineralization that we haven't yet drilled or explored, but it has something interesting. So that's when these types of deposits on the seafloor, when you've got this underwater hot spring, they don't just happen in one area, they usually form in clusters. And so you might develop clusters of mineral deposits. And that's what we're indicating here. And just as an example, in Japan, here's one that was actually mined. And so these dots represent mines. The largest circle here is greater than 50 million tons. The small circles are less than 5 million tons. So Palmer right now would sit in the middle here between this 5 and 10 million ton dot. And here in this district, 5 kilometers for scale, you've got several small deposits, a few medium-sized, and maybe one large deposit. So as a district, over, I don't know, maybe it was 100 years that they were mining this area, they mined cumulatively 138 million tons from that district. So it's not to say that this will develop into a district, but there is potential on the property to add additional deposits. And in this particular case, it wouldn't necessarily end up being a larger mine. With this type of deposit, it means you end up mining for a longer period of time at the same rate. So instead of maybe being a 10-year mine life, you might end up having a 50 or 100-year mine life if you can continue to explore and find new deposits. For location, if you're not familiar, here's Haines, the Haines Highway pointed out, and Porcupine Road going out to this blue area, which is core part of the mineral property, and faintly in red there is the deposit area there. The purple outline would be the Hainesboro. And zooming in a little bit, or not zooming in, but adding a few layers here, there's the Hainesboro in purple, the green outline is the Haines State Forest, we've got the Chilkat Bald Eagle Preserve inside of there. This blue hatched area is Mental Health Trust property that was selected by the trust and leased to us for mineral exploration and is part of our larger property. We actually no longer have this little bit up here. We've got rid of that part. So quickly going through the history, and some of you may be more familiar with some of it than I am, but it does go back to 1969, and some of you may know Merrill Palmer, who the project is named after, and he was a logger here and eventually became a self-taught mineral prospector and really discovered this property, and it bears his name now, and he's really responsible for helping it carry through over the decades as well. And over the years, he did bring in other companies and other partners to help carry the project forward. It does take money and expertise to continue to advance the project. And several companies did come in. They were interested. They drilled a couple holes here and there. They did some mapping. They did some sampling. They found some things that kept people interested, but they didn't find that kind of true blue, really interesting, high-grade mineralization. So other companies, they would drop it, and Merrill would attract another company, and it would carry on. And so what brought us to the property is, there's that high potential in Southeast and the West Coast of having these types of deposits, but it's also a good location. And it's the same reason why the Mental Health Trust decided to select the area for their future potential as well. And so the Mental Health Trust was given 1 million acres of land. Their selection here is about 100,000 acres and represents about 10% of the Mental Health Trust land package for generating revenue through mineral potential for this particular property. And so that was selected. It's also part of the 1982 consensus here that created the Chilkat Bald Eagle Preserve and the Haines State Forest, and Merrill Palmer was one of the signatories of that agreement. And then Constantine came around in 2006 and has been working since then. We made a few initial discoveries and made our first resource estimate, which was a big step, as Russ explained. It's a very technical estimate. That was first done in 2010. So that really changed the game from early exploration project into something more significant. And then since then, we've doubled the size of that resource estimate. We recalculated in 2015. And we've also invested quite a bit of capital to do that. We've now invested over $30 million into the property to help define that resource and build up the data. And it does take a lot of financial investment, and so we did attract a partner named Doa Metals and Mining in 2013. They were interested and they kept investing their money, and now they've become what we call a joint venture partner on the property. And so Constantine now is owner of 51% of the property, and Doa has 49%, and we operate as a joint venture partnership. And over the years, we did a lot of environmental work, went through environmental assessment with the BLM, and continue now on what we're calling this dual path. So we're trying to better understand what we have, and also explore for more. And we're doing this in a way that I like to describe as responsible mineral exploration and modern mineral exploration, and looking toward modern resource development. And what that means to me is that we study things first now, rather than just building a road or going underground and just kind of going for it. Now we do wetlands delineation studies first. We do raptor surveys. We do hydrology tests. So we know what kind of water we're going to be getting into. What's the quality of that water? What's the pressure of that water? What kind of method are we going to use to dispose of that water? We do a lot of reclamation planning. So before you do any disturbance now with the regulators, you need to have a plan in place of if I build this road, when I'm all done with it, I'm going to recontour, I'm going to reseed, I'm going to do all of this, and it's going to cost me X number of dollars. And so for the work that we've done, we actually have a reclamation plan in place. Some of you may have read it. And it was reviewed by all the regulators and approved. And so we know how many hours of dozer work it's going to be, how many hours of helicopter work, how many pounds of grass seed we're going to need, how many pounds of cement we're going to need to plug drill holes. All that's been calculated, and so there's a few $100,000 that's been calculated and bonded for the current operation of the project. So all of that's done before anything's approved and before you move ahead with any development now. And it also involves, for me, investing in environmental stewardship. And so that's buying the right equipment, hiring the right people, doing the right training, and continuing education for people. And even for myself, I take ongoing educational courses, not just in geology, but I've taken fisheries courses, I've taken permitting courses, and always trying to learn more about what's the newest and the best, and learn from other exploration projects and other mine projects, and learn from people's mistakes as well, and learn from historic mistakes, and learn how we can all do it better in the future. And also it's important, moving forward, and what this is all a part of is collaborating now with other area users, other nearby community members, and thinking about the future. So it takes a lot of conversations now on the front end to make sure we're all moving forward together. So a little bit about Constantine. We did form in 2006 as a company specifically to explore this project. And we're a mineral exploration company, and that is our area of expertise. And we're really committed to the project, and I've worked on it for a long time, which I'll explain in a little bit. And we do have a partnership now with DOA, and some of you have questions. If I can get to the slide. DOA Metals and Mining, they have a long history. It's over 120-year history company in Japan. They've done mining and processing of this particular type of ore. They actually were pioneers in understanding and figuring out how to process these ores in Japan. And now they operate the largest zinc smelter in Japan. They currently buy concentrate all over the world, but they do buy concentrate here in Alaska as well from Red Dog and Greens Creek and process their zinc, or part of their zinc. And what's great about them, and they're selective in choosing projects, but we were also really selective in choosing a partner. And we did have other companies looking at partnering with us on this project, and we chose DOA for a number of reasons. One, because they do have this history of expertise on this particular type of ore, but also because they're very, very, very committed to the environment and to doing it right. And they work closely with us to make sure that this project is going to meet their standards as well as our standards. And they not only process these ores, but now they process recycled goods. So they're big players in the recycled market, and they buy all the old cell phones and computers, and they're advancing technology to make sure they can recycle more and more of the minerals that are in those electronics, and also more and more percentages of those, so there's more recovery of that. So they're really great operators to work with. And one thing that's not well known is they have a longer history with us. So this photo is from the year 2000, long before I was here. And the guy up top is with a company called Inco, and Inco was a mining company. They were looking at doing a deal with Merrill on the property. And the guy at the bottom is Tosh Suyama. And he is from DOA. And so he was here in 2000 looking at the property. And that rusty bit, that's actually the discovery outcrop that Merrill found in the 60s. And so the white little bits there, it's a mineral called barite. It's a very heavy mineral, it's a very dense mineral. And some of that had fallen off the slope in Glacier Creek and fallen down. And Merrill was out there logging, picked up some rocks. They seemed kind of heavy and kind of weird. He had them tested. They came back with high-grade silver and other minerals. And said, wow, we're onto something. had to find where they came from. Hiked up the mountain, found this outcrop, the Discovery Outcrop. We call it the main zone. And at the time in 2000, no one had drilled it. And because the barite is there, but the reason it's rusty, it's just like your car. When it's exposed to air and water, it rusts out and some of the metals leach out and they leave. And so the copper and the zinc that was there, Mother Nature had leached out and just left the barite. And so they weren't really sure what it all meant. And Merrill was in the background saying, you guys need to drill this outcrop. And nobody listened to him until 2007 when we came in and drilled the outcrop and we found the deposit. And now this is 2017. Tosh, 17 years later, is still with DOA and partnered with us on the property. So he's been aware of the project for a long time. He's now more senior with the company, and he remembers meeting Merrill back in 2000 and visiting the property, and they're very excited about what we've been able to discover since they first visited in 2000. And thank you to Dijon Delights for the smoked salmon up there. So moving forward, as I mentioned, exploration evaluation, we spent about $7 million this year looking at things for upgrading the resource, technical studies, environmental studies, road building, lots of drilling. We actually drilled 10,000 meters, not 7,000, because it was going really well. So we're busy investing in things, trying to see what the next steps are. We ended up drilling for about 3 months this year with 2 drills. Did a lot of engineering and environmental studies. We're still doing some road construction out there. Southeast Road Builders will be busy there for maybe another week or so, extending the road for us, putting in some culverts. And then, of course, investing in ongoing environmental stewardship and projects like this here today. Going back to the geology just for a little minute, this is a slice through the ocean floor. You've got that layer cake geology, you've got the stuff below, the ore horizon, the red part, and the stuff above. 200 million years ago, that's the seafloor. Then it got slapped onto the side of North America, built the mountains, added onto the continent, and today it sits up in the mountain, and the old seafloor is folded through the mountain kind of like that and pops out the other side. And that's where the deposit sits in the mountain. This is Glacier Creek Valley. That ocean floor continues to fold throughout the area, and it pops out in other areas, and we have what we call prospects, so Cap and Nunatak, and we've got several others around the area. So taking a cross-section through the mountain, looking at that geology, again, you've got something folded around. This is what we're interested in exploring. This is the stuff above, this is the stuff below, and it comes in different grades. And so we're estimating between drill holes of what's happening. So the reasons why we like it, we've got areas that are thick, they're continuous, they're high grade, and vertical is a good geometry for mining. So for us, it's worthy of more investigation. And in 2017, we were successful in drilling more of that mineralization, so we've been expanding this area off to the west. And we also made a new discovery out here at a prospect called the Nunatak, and we're calling it the AG zone. So this is another area that may develop into a deposit, but right now we only have a few drill holes into it. We don't have enough data, we can't call it a deposit technically yet, but we're excited about some of the high-grade silver and zinc that we've been finding there. And so as Cindy and Russ mentioned, we're drilling more and more holes, trying to find and build that resource to create that block model. We also drilled one hole. This is an infill hole. So this is an area where we had far apart drill holes. We wanted to test how we can do infill drilling from surface versus underground. There's certain areas we can infill from surface successfully, certain areas that would need to be drilled from underground to do it effectively. And so we did a test up here. Previously, the drill holes had come from high up top and drilled down this way. Now we were able to drill a more horizontal hole this way. It's much shorter and gives us a better angle through the area. So that was a test. We're beginning to do some infill drilling to help upgrade the resource, and we're continuing, though, more focus on expanding things and getting the bigger footprint. This is a long section that she described. So the cross-section is kind of going north-south and opening it up like a book. The long section is taking a opposite direction slice and projecting everything on this plane. And so it's a little confusing, but hopefully we'll present this many, many times. For engineers and mineral analysts, this is what they like to analyze. But the basic premise here is you can't see the grid very well, but it's about 100 meter, or it is 100 meters between the blocks here, and the black dots represent where does the drill hole intersect that, and then we make a blob around it, so that's our resource outline blob, based on what we saw in these drill holes. And these new red dots are ones that we drilled this year, and they're basically adding additional mineralization to the resource that was thicker and higher grade than what we thought was there. And for reference, so this is 1,400 meters elevation. The top of the mountain is near here. This is 600 meters. The river valley, the Glacier Creek River Valley, is somewhere around here. So if you were to go into the mountain with the river, this is where it's at. So the mineralization goes from basically the top of the mountain down into the river valley, and we've drilled holes even below the river valley. And because we're on a mountain, it's safest to drill from the top down. And so to continue exploring, this doesn't stop here. It hopefully likely continues down here somewhere, but to explore it, this may be an area that we might want to wait until we have underground, like a tunnel into the mountain to explore, so it can be done efficiently. Because right now, we've drilled a hole from the top of the mountain over a mile long into the mountain below the river valley. And it's hard when you're a mile away trying to control where that drill hole is going. And also, you can only drill in the summer. So going underground gives you the ability to drill year-round and access the property year-round. So it's something we're evaluating. There's other opportunities to do infill drilling from surface on the higher areas. They also have new fancy technology where they have directional drilling. You can actually drive the drill and tell it where to go. But it only goes at a certain rate, and it's very expensive as well. So there's different technical parameters that will control how we do the upgrade infill work here. And I did want to throw this in. You'll often see it in our presentations, corporate fine print. But it is meaningful, and if you ever get a chance to read it, it's worthwhile. What it basically says is between these drill holes, we don't know for sure what's there. We don't have all the detail. So just like Cindy and Russ presented at the inferred resource level, there's a lot of assumptions that are being made. We don't know what the regulations will be 10 years from now. We don't know what the metals prices will be 10 years from now. We don't know what's between each drill hole. There's a lot that we don't know. And that's the reason why it's called exploration. We're still learning. We're still gaining all this data. And so for this, we try really hard not to speculate. So we're not putting the cart before the horse, and we want to have good data and make statements that are backed up by as much information as we can gain to back up that statement. So this is just a statement that we don't have a crystal ball. We can't look into the future. We can't make up things that we don't know. And part of that is that we don't know if this will develop from one deposit into multiple deposits. It could. It has elsewhere in similar environments, but it also has not elsewhere. And so we need to do more exploration to tell what will be the ultimate district scale potential. And you may never know until you actually mine it out. And so we're looking at other prospects right now. They could be significant, they could be nothing. And right now we've drilled some holes at Ninnetak this year, and they were pretty significant. If we drill more holes, we don't know right now. And this is a cross-section through the property wide. So 2 kilometers here, you've got the seafloor kind of folding through the mountain. So that's what connects the prospects, is that old seafloor folding through the mountains. And here is the Ninnetak in 3D perspective, and so you've got that horizon kind of folded through. We've drilled some holes there. It may extend. We've got mineralization over on this side. We've got 20% zinc on surface over here. It may extend, it may not. We need to drill it out to find out for sure. So that's a little bit about the technical information that I wanted to go through just after Cindy and Russ, so hopefully it kind of connected the dots with a little bit of the theory that they were presenting with where we're at right now and the next steps. I did want to spend some time, I know I'm running out of time, on some of our environmental work, which is equally as important for everything. And part of that modern approach is that we need to make sure that not only is this possible to extract economically, but in a way that's going to meet regulations and protect the area for the future after the mine is closed and during operations. So most important to that is obviously water that's flowing from the area, and we do a lot of work on fisheries and water studies, both on our current operations, doing fuel training and work to make sure we're operating responsibly, as well as this is Fish and Game here, doing some studies on not only fish presence, but also what is the sediment, what do the algae look like, a lot of information there. And we collect a lot of data, and we're building that data set and building that detail. So we have wildlife data on raptors and bears and goats, and we have water quality data both from surface waters and groundwaters, and data from summertime, springtime, wintertime, and building up information on vegetation, invasive plant species, wetlands work, weather data, rock geochemistry, what kind of rocks are they. So all of this will be used to help determine what will the mine plan be, what will the, 2 minutes? Oh man. I'll have to come back tomorrow. But there are a lot of regulations in place, and I'm really happy to be a part of this format where now the regulators, hopefully if they make it in from Juneau, they can talk about what their role is and how they regulate all of these activities and where the public is involved in that process as well. Because it is highly regulated at the mine operations position, but also during exploration as far as where does our helicopter go, where do our trucks go, how do we handle our fuel, what do we do with our stormwater. All of these things are stipulated in all of our approvals. And so we have a lot of regulations in place that we train our employees on to make sure we're operating and meeting our standards. I also wanted to mention, I could talk more on the environmental aspects, but just for time I'll skip into some of the community building work that we want to do on this project as well, because that's where I hope all of us can work together and collaborate and really look at ways to maximize all the benefits for everyone on this project. And it's not only shopping locally and hiring locally, it's finding those ways that where can we work together for collaborating on studies, where can we work together on lowering the power cost for everyone, or competition in cargo. And so there are economic benefits, lots of jobs. We had about, I'd say 25 local folks working with us this summer between the drilling and the camp services and road building. The last few years, it's about $1 million a year in local goods and services that we buy and wages. And we're looking to grow that. But for me, it's not about the numbers, it's about the people. And so I'll just steal a couple minutes here. And there's opportunities for families to stay together. We've had people working for us for 7 years, 5 years, summer after summer, and gaining more experience and taking more senior positions with us as well. And taking that from high school into university and hopefully into careers. And we've got people working on the mountain, community workers, office workers, camp workers, using skills that they've learned and skills that are transferable to other industries, whether it's tourism or fishing as well. And trying to bring in a lot of local knowledge and expertise helps us do a better job and helps everyone understand what's going on with the project. So part of that is also me hosting meetings and discussions and keeping our outreach materials updated and participating in events, and it's really about learning about things too. And I love when everyone invites me to different events to go see different places or meet different people, and I hope that we can continue to do more and get through. We're now in this evaluation stage where there's lots of studies being done, and we're not close to the development stage, but we will keep updating and giving more information as we move along. And so next steps for us, and it's just continuing exploration. But next step is also really more of this. And part of it is what do you want the next step to be, and helping us understand, do you want more forums like this? Do you want shorter seminars, like once a month? Do you want me to bring in the water quality experts and spend a day talking about our water quality data? Do you want to come to site and visit more? Do you want we're interested in hearing about everyone, what they want. Do you want us to help work with workforce development or school programs? And there's a lot of resources to stay updated. So we've got our Haynes office here, as Harriet mentioned, is in the CIA building, and Sherry's there throughout the year, and Darcy and I are in there as well. And we've got our website. You can also sign up on there. There's a spot to put your name and email address. So if we have a news release, you'll be automatically notified if there's a big news release. And also DNR may talk about this, but they have a site that's a home for these advanced exploration projects and mines where you can go and access all of our permits and approvals and information about things that they keep updated. So those are different resources available to everyone, and we'll continue to build on that. So thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Hello, my name is Kendra Zamzow. I work for a group called the Center for Science in Public Participation, and my talk today is on exploration and mining, the impacts and mitigation, how to mitigate for some of the impacts we are seeing in mines. So the first thing to know is that the unexpected always happens, and you have to be prepared for that. You may intersect fractures as you're mining that you didn't expect, that move groundwater in different ways. Accidents happen, spills happen, and human error happens, whether that's workers that are too tired, or a corporate culture that gets into cost cutting, or it's simply weather and other issues that increase the risk from human error. So because that is simply a part of life, as you're getting ready to look at these exploration projects and mining projects, you need to have, you both need to talk and need to listen, both the mining company and the community. And then as they move forward into actual mine design and operations, they need to plan, and the citizens should be part of the input for that. And you need to back up where you think there are risks, and then you need to back up the backups. Another part is that you have to monitor, and the monitoring is both by the mining company. Regulators should be monitoring, and citizens should also be monitoring, because then the citizens own that data, and they understand it, and they understand where to monitor and what to monitor. So it's really something that needs to be done at many different levels. What I'll actually be talking about is some basic geochemistry to understand why some mines are riskier than other mines. And then I'll talk about a mining project that went through exploration but has not yet become a mine, and some of the problems that we saw there and how to mitigate some of what we saw. And then a little bit about underground mining and an example of a site where underground mining occurred, but no processing of the ore occurred at the site. So the impacts that we're seeing were simply from the mining itself. And again, what you might do to look forward and mitigate for some of the problems that they've had. And all of the mines I'll be talking about are what we call modern mines. They were either started after the year 2000 or exploration was after the year 2000. So with geochemistry basics, the basic concept that you want to make sure you understand is that people don't mine a metal. They don't mine copper or zinc or lead. They mine a mineral. The bedrock itself is made of many minerals. And the job of the mining company is not only to determine what is of interest and of worth to them as a metal in that mineral complex, but how to get that out. And there are natural processes as you mine that convert minerals to metals, and we call them trace elements or major elements depending on the concentration. So minerals are, so if you're looking at copper, the metal copper is also connected to oxygen, iron, sulfur, and maybe carbonates and other materials in the rock. Once you start bringing that material up to the surface, you begin to release trace metals. So copper would be one of those trace metals. Iron might be one of the, we would actually call that a minor element. And once they're in this dissolved trace form, that's the form that is bioavailable to plants and animals, and especially to aquatic life. Aquatic life is generally more sensitive to metals than other life forms. So this conversion of minerals to trace metals and the ease with which they're taken up by aquatic life or other life is affected by a lot of different environmental factors, including pH, dissolved organic material, such as leaf litter that breaks down further and further, calcium, and then simply there's how the rock itself is structured and the size and so forth, all affect this conversion rate of minerals to toxic trace elements. And because it's complicated, again, it means that we need to monitor. We need to monitor before there's mining, that's called baseline sampling, and we need to monitor continually through operations and in different locations and different media and species. So when we define a high-risk mine, there are three things that really define whether a mine poses a potential risk, and that is the amount of sulfide in the ore body or the host rock, which is the material around the ore, the volume of ore that is taken out, and the hydrology of the area. So the more sulfide you have as a ratio of other material, the higher the risk is, because as that sulfide is in contact with oxygen and water, it turns into sulfuric acid unless there is neutralizing material nearby. The volume, you simply have more material you have to control, and then the hydrology, whether you're looking at rain and snow, whether you're looking at high water tables, it's the amount of water that enters these areas that has the greater potential to move the contaminants once they've begun to dissolve. And that causes a lot of problems. So generally you'll see more problems at wet areas than you do in desert areas. So I've just mentioned this. Sulfide turns into sulfuric acid, which is essentially battery acid. And this is a natural process, but as you bring material to the surface that was once sequestered underground, and you break it up into smaller and smaller pieces, the reactions go more and more quickly, and you generate more acid than you would in a natural weathering process of just rock being exposed on a mountain. And it can become very, very aggressive and get into a kind of a never-ending cycle. The acid itself is what dissolves metals that are toxic to fish, such as copper and zinc. And this slide that I'm showing with the graph and the dots all over the slide, if you look on the left, the vertical axis, this is it's measuring the neutralizing potential of the rock that has been brought up and tested. And each one of those dots on the graph represents a drill hole where some material was taken out. On the horizontal axis is the acid generating potential of the rock. So the rock itself has a potential to generate acid or to neutralize acid. And again, it's that ratio that defines whether you will generate acid and also the rate, whether it will show up right away or whether it will show up decades down the road. So on this graph to the left, there's kind of a green, it's been colored in kind of to the green, and that is material that will never go acid, no matter how small it is, no matter what conditions it's subject to, it simply will never turn into acid. Unfortunately, there isn't, at this particular site, there isn't a lot of material that is like that. Virtually all of the material is below that 1-to-1 line that you see, and that is all material that will definitely go acid. And so this is where you have to, you begin to collect the data, you monitor and collect a variety of data, and then you say, okay, we're going to have a lot of acid material we have to deal with, and then you plan for that, and then you also have to back up in case your plans begin to fail at certain points. And I've indicated this acid material with kind of a reddish color around those. And this particular site is the proposed Pebble project, and a lot of their rocks they have determined will take about 40 years before they go acid. So the caution there, the good news is that they know that, and you can bring in neutralizing material to try to make sure that it never goes acid. You calculate those amounts. The cautionary part is that the mine may not be there in 40 years, and maybe they think they have enough material to neutralize in 40 years, but maybe 60 years down the road, that material has all been consumed and you're still producing acid. So when it takes a long time for acid to produce, it's possible no one will be on site to see if the calculations were right and whether material remains permanently neutralized or not. So some of the terms you'll see when you're looking at mining projects are ARD, which means acid rock drainage, and PAG, which means potentially acid generating rock. So what we saw on that in that red shaded area of the last graph was potentially acid generating rock. And this isn't it's not the metal itself, it's the iron sulfides around it or the sulfides around the metal that create that sulfuric acid when it contacts oxygen and water. And a lot of the material in bedrock is pyrite, which is iron sulfides. So this is really critical to the acid generation process. Pyrite itself, whether it's simply exposed on a hillside after a landslide or a road goes through a hillside or a mine begins to move this material to the surface. Once pyrite is on the surface, it begins to weather with oxygen and water when it's in contact with that. Then two things start to happen. Your iron starts to go through one cycle and your sulfide starts to go through another cycle. Your iron, which I'm representing by these little green dots as what we call reduced iron, it's the acid. As you start to form acid, the iron comes off of that in this reduced form, and then a bacteria starts to attack that. It actually uses it as food, and it converts it to a different form of iron. And this is really important because that other form of iron, which is called iron 3, attacks that pyrite the way that oxygen does, but it attacks it at a much more aggressively, and the material begins to break down faster and faster and faster and generate sulfuric acid faster and faster. And it becomes this never-ending cycle where your sulfuric acid is dissolving iron into this iron 2 form, bacteria attack it, convert it to iron 3, and dissolve even more pyrite and even more iron. So it makes for some pretty happy bacteria, but it makes for a lot of acid. So the picture in the corner is showing this process, exactly this process. There's a red pool, and the red is the dissolved iron, and because it's that particular color, we know it's a very acidic pool. So I'm also showing after the iron is going through its own cycle, and then the sulfur is contacting oxygen and water and becoming that sulfuric acid. So these are simultaneous processes feeding off each other. And I've talked here about what acid, how acid gets generated, and it will release anything that's in that mineral matrix, whether that's copper or zinc or cadmium or iron, aluminum, lead. It'll release all of that material. But there's also elements that can be in a rock matrix that leach out simply by being exposed to air and water without any acid whatsoever. And in particular, arsenic, selenium, molybdenum, and antimony and zinc. Zinc can be liberated either with acid or without acid. So if you stop the acid process, you still have to be concerned with what we call metal leaching and what conditions promote that and how to reduce it or control it. And again, this all depends on a lot of different environmental factors. So then I show this slide of the minerals that we know are up at the Constantine project. Chalcopyrite which is a copper iron sulfide, is the one that they're really after. They also have a lot of sphalerite, which is a zinc iron sulfide, and galena, which is a lead sulfide. And copper, zinc, and lead, they all like to hang around sulfide. Sulfide is just kind of the life of the party for this. They like to be around it, but once you start this acid generation process, this weathering process, they all dissolve off of this. And again, because there's iron as part of these minerals, and that iron can turn into this this iron 3, there will be a fairly aggressive acid generation for this kind of material. And what I'm showing below that is figure 7.7 is a cross-section of an ore body that they have found. This is a figure from one of their own technical reports, and it's showing the type of material that they're finding down there. So some of the material is carbonate ore, and carbonate consumes acid. So it's great that some of that is there. But as you look at this picture, you see that at least in the ore zone that they're showing here, there isn't very much carbonate. A lot of the material, and certainly most of the material that has copper and zinc in it, has sulfides. There's the massive pyrite is the copper-rich part of it. The zinc they show is associated with a barite ore, which does not generate acid. But I believe there's also quite a bit of zinc that is associated with acid that just isn't shown in this picture. So again, if you think back to that graph that we showed, what we're interested in is the amount of neutralizing material and amount of acid material and what that ratio is. And this becomes important because there's also two different waste streams that we'll talk about, and some may have more neutralizing material and some will have very, very little. So as I move that picture off to the side, I want to show just the general makeup of the rock around that ore body and the kind of minerals that are there. So we have barite, which is a barium sulfate, which again does not release acid. And then a lot of minerals that have things like aluminum and silicon and oxygen and things that don't affect your acid or your neutralization either way. There's also some arsenopyrite, and the amount of that they find is going to be important, partly because of the iron, which again is important for acid generation, but also because as that dissolves, then you release arsenic. And that's not so much a problem for fish, but it's, as we all know, it's certainly a problem for people. So that's kind of the makeup of the material that they've been drilling through so far. There's also some other things associated with exploration that we need to consider as potentially toxic to aquatic life. As you're drilling, you do some blasting. And so the amount of that and the proximity of blasting to water bodies is important, partly because of the amount of ammonia that can be produced. And drilling muds, which you use as you drill these deep exploration holes, can be made with petroleum distillates. Some of them are, some of them aren't. So if they are, again, it's something to keep out of the water body. So some of the responses of fish and aquatic life, and we talk about fish, but a lot of these affect the entire food chain from the benthic invertebrates in the sediment and the stream bottom to algae to diatoms, all the way up to fish, zooplankton. So kind of keep that in mind as well. Copper, we'll be showing a little video here, but copper causes salmon to lose their sense of smell, a little bit of their ability to stay upright. It kind of makes them wobble. They have a hard time staying upright. It can affect their whether they have successful reproduction. It can start to fray their gills, and of course it kills algae. That's why we put copper on the bottom of our boats. Zinc has some similar effects. It doesn't affect the sense of smell, but it does damage the gills and can cause some other impacts, lowered growth, and some physical deformities. Aluminum and iron work in a different way. Aluminum, as it's dissolved and it moves from acid condition in the stream to a more neutral condition, it drops out and it becomes like a mucus-like stringer that then wraps around the gills of the fish and it suffocates them. Iron, again, it's not a problem when it's dissolved, but when it precipitates out, when it moves from an acid condition to a neutral pH or an alkaline pH, it falls out of the water, but it falls out as a very hard material, and it can actually harden the bottom and make it a little bit like concrete, and it seals in all that benthic material, and then you've lost a big part of your food chain when you no longer have those little benthic invertebrates and worms and small clams and stuff that your fish can get to. So it really kills off a stream that way. The one thing to point out is that none of these materials biomagnify up through the food chain, so they don't get in increasing concentrations at higher trophic levels, and none of them should have an impact on consumers, on people that eat the fish. So now I'm showing just a stylized fish with some water coming in, flowing over through the gills. I've got a little orange-colored dot there to represent copper. It's got a couple little arms out there because this is the dissolved form that is able to grab onto or attach to other material. And I'm going to show a little video. Will you be able to see that? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to show a little video of what copper does in the water at fairly low concentrations. So what you'll be seeing is two tanks, two water tanks, and both of them have a small coho in them, and the top one has not had any copper added to it, and the bottom one has had 10 micrograms per liter of copper added to it. And what you'll see is if you look above the top tank, you'll see a little green dot. And when that dot turns red, that indicates that an alarm, a pheromone alarm, has been dropped into the tank. And it's a natural pheromone that fish release when they believe they're in danger. So whenever you break the skin of a fish, it releases this pheromone, and it's a signal to other fish to get out of the way that there's some kind of a risk or a predator involved in the area. And what copper does is it disrupts their ability to detect that alarm signal. So if you watch, if we press play, watch what's happening. The fish are just swimming around. Then watch as that green light turns red. They've dropped in the alarm pheromone. And then look at the difference of the behavior in the two fish. The one on the bottom is still running around, zipping around like a little fish does, and the one on the top has just stopped moving altogether. And it's just kind of floated down like a little leaf in the stream. So it doesn't look like it's something you want to eat. It looks like something that fell into the stream. So these are very subtle effects that the result, though, is that then predators see this little zippy fish and they consume more of them, and then you have decreases in the population. So it's not like you're going to be able to measure high amounts of copper in fish tissue and say, oh, look, that's what killed the fish. It's these more subtle effects that we're really concerned about. So I've shown these little orange dots on the fish's nose, on its lateral line. They can also go on the gills. These are places where they like to attach, where copper likes to attach and affect different parts of the fish. But the copper isn't in the stream all by itself. It's got these other materials in there, and these act in ways that reduce the toxicity of the copper. It's what we call competitive binding. Either the material will actually go up and grab those arms of copper and hold it, and when they're doing that, it can't attach to the fish. Or they go to the sites that copper wants to get to, and they get there first. And then there's no place for the copper to sit. So again, it's the environment itself as well. It's the environment determines whether this material will enter the stream and then also how toxic it is to aquatic life. And then this slide called the hyporheic zone, this just talks about, we have to think about what's the pathway that these move through, and a lot of times it's groundwater. So the slide we're showing here is looking at the pathway. Once these contaminants are released, how do they actually move from where the rock is, where they started, out to where the fish are? And one of the pathways that we need to really look at is the groundwater pathway, and in particular, once it enters into where there's a stream and you have groundwater running under the stream water, and that's called the hyporheic zone. And it's a really important pathway to be aware of and understand. Contaminants can move through that. As we all know, where groundwater comes into the stream, this is where salmon tend to like to put their eggs, because it doesn't freeze, so that the eggs stay in liquid water all winter, and the groundwater brings a lot of oxygen to them. So that same hyporheic zone that bathes these eggs all winter can also be a route for contaminants to get to fish eggs. So again, just something to keep in mind when you're looking at how trace metals could move from these ore bodies into aquatic life. So the slide on slide 15 show a little bit about considering, again, from the source, the material as it enters the water, and then once it enters the water, there are changes as you go downstream as your pH changes. So when it enters the water, if that's an acid environment, if for some reason you do get some acid drainage into the stream, then you'll have a lower pH, you'll have a lot of dissolved metals in there, and sometimes something like this is even allowed legally, and it's called a mixing zone. Then as you go further down the stream and your pH tends to becomes more neutral as everything begins to dilute out, this is where your iron starts to fall out at a pH 4 to 5, and then a little later, pH 5 to 6, your aluminum falls out, and it becomes these strings that wrap around the fish gills. And the photo I'm showing at the top there is from a similar location to the one I'd showed earlier with the deep red water. That was up in the Sierra Nevadas at a mine remediation site I was working on. And this is from an earlier time period before remediation began, and it's just showing what it looks like when that iron hits the water. It becomes that very orange color. People that saw the pictures of the Gold King spill into the Animas River, that's what was happening there as well. That orange color means the iron is falling out and beginning to settle onto the bottom. So let's talk about exploration and some of what might occur there and how to avoid some of that. What we're looking at as sources there is not the ore so much as the drilling muds, the drill cuttings from trying to get these holes drilled and looking at the mineralogy. And then the downhole water. As you drill these, you encounter water that can then move up out of the hole and into the environment. So this picture I'm showing that looks very swampy, it actually is kind of swampy, but it's the landscape in this particular area has some of this kind of environment, this very swampy area. This is probably more towards spring. It can look a lot drier as you move towards fall and as you move uphill in different parts of this mine exploration site. What I'm showing is a platform where they move drill rigs onto this by helicopter, and that actually has very little impact. Once they move these drill platforms off, there's a little bit of scarring on the tundra, but it really fills in within a year or so. There's very little impact from simply putting the pads down and having helicopter support. To the right corner, the lower corner there, you see these kind of rectangle areas, and these are trenches that they dug into the tundra, and the purpose of those is when you drill one of these exploration holes, some of them can be thousands of feet deep, and as you put these diamond drill bits down through that bedrock, they get very hot. So you want to take water out of these local ponds, mix it with a powder to create a drilling mud that you then pump downhole with the drill bit to keep the bit cool. And as it's circulating downhole, it's also bringing drill cuttings to the surface. And all of that material, that drilling mud that's circulating, and also the drill cuttings, all has to be disposed of. And it's really a kind of a circular process. You can't keep using the same volume of material. You have to keep adding to it as you're drilling down. So they run the drilling muds through these trenches. It's one way you can do it. One way you can dispose of the material is simply to put a hose out there and shoot the waste out onto the tundra or into one of these ponds. And that's perfectly legal in the state of Alaska. And under some conditions, there's no problems with doing that. But under other conditions, there are a lot of problems with that. And so one of the things they had done at this site was they started to use these trenches. And the purpose of that was to settle out the heavy drill cuttings themselves. The rest of the drilling mud would go through there and it would still end up out on the tundra. But the cuttings, they wanted to settle out. And the reason for that was if you encounter the mineralized ore body, then the cuttings are going to be full of sulfides, and they'll be full of iron sulfides, and because they're very fine, they're the consistency of silt, very, very fine material, like a powder, the reactions happen very, very quickly, and so you can get acid generation very quickly on these cuttings. This actually had not been documented in the literature before, so my boss and I were asked to go out to a site and look for this kind of reaction. Was this happening? And also in general, how was reclamation going? And how well were these sites being reclaimed in this area that had a sulfide ore body? The site we went to had been, we were out on the Pebble site of the proposed Pebble project. They had drilled up through 2012 and then had stopped any exploration drilling. We went out in 2016, so they had had 4 years to do any reclamation, any final reclamation. These holes are usually reclaimed the same year or the next year. They don't wait till the end of the project. They reclaim them on an ongoing basis. So they'd had not only all the years of drilling to be reclaiming, they'd also had 4 additional years where there'd been no other activity. So you can see, I have one picture here that simply shows how they discharge into local depressions and ponds, and again, that's perfectly legal. I have another picture that is a little better close-up of a drill rig and a settling trench. Unfortunately, a lot of that material did go acid. We ran across about 5 sites that look like this picture on slide 18. We believe that this drill waste was discharged in around 2006. We were there in 2016, so this had occurred over a period of 10 years. How quickly it went acid, how quickly it became that orange color, we don't know. As far as we know, we're the first people to document that this was on the landscape. I have an inset there that shows a little bit of you can see the change in color from the tailings, the cuttings, I'm sorry, not the tailings, the cuttings that had settled out on the landscape, and then the natural underlying material under that was a darker color. It didn't have sulfides, it wasn't going acid. Although some of this could be seeping down into that lower natural soil material. And I've showed some of the chemistry. We took samples of this material, of this drill cuttings. We took samples at 5 different areas, and I'm showing the background soil pH, sulfate, arsenic, copper, and molybdenum. They actually didn't capture pH, but you can see that DDH means diamond drill hole. It's what they use for exploration. GH is different kinds, so usually a shallower hole. And so there's just some of the chemistry. You can see that all of these places had very high copper and molybdenum. And again, that indicates that they'd hit the ore body, and these cuttings were from that ore body. The ore they were targeting is a copper moly ore. So the trenches were supposed to help take care of that problem, or what people had said could be a problem. Again, nobody had documented it that I'm aware of until we were out there in 2016. And so what I'm showing here on the left is a site that had 5 different settling pits in a row. they'd covered them up. It's pretty barren of vegetation on top of the pits, and it's not a chemical reaction. That was just kind of poor handling of vegetation. A colleague of ours went out there in 2011 as they were drilling this hole, as the material was going through the sumps, and they were about 100 feet downstream, and they measured the water quality in a groundwater spring that was coming up out of a wetland close to where this was. We went back in 2016, measured the water quality in the same groundwater spring, and I'm showing that in this table. Alaska water quality standards are on the bottom. The water chemistry from 2011 is in the middle, and 2016 is in the top. And you see that everything was meeting water quality standards in 2011, and they were starting to exceed them in 2016. And if they continue on this path, then they could be exceeding the standards for copper. And again, it's a groundwater spring. It's near a wetland. We're starting to get into aquatic habitat, so that's a little bit concerning. We only did this exercise at one location. We don't know how widespread it is, but what we think is happening is these trenches are unlined, and as the water table rises up and down, so it comes up in the spring when you get your snow melt, and comes down again in the fall, that this is flushing these metals out of these cuttings and flushing them downhill into the springs. So again, just something we've observed this. More work needs to be done to see how widespread it is, but a simple mitigation might be to just line those pits. When you get into mineralized cuttings, don't discharge to the surface and don't discharge into an unlined pit, and you may solve a lot of those problems that we're starting to see. Slide 20, I'm showing when you reclaim a drill hole, you should cut off the drill stem that's up above the surface. You should cement the upper layer, say the upper 10 or 20 feet, depending where your aquifer is, and then at the surface, let it blend back into the landscape. We saw a lot of places where drill stems had not been cut off, and this was one place where apparently they'd been having quite a bit of trouble because the gravel looked like they had very recently tried again to close this drill hole. The gravel was pretty new. We were out there in a heavy rainstorm, and we saw this milky fluid coming out of this drill stem, just out of one of the seams. And it was very high pH, which indicates a cement or a bentonite material, which is what they use to try to seal these holes. So for whatever reason, it wasn't taking. It was moving down into a wetland. And in the table below, I show some of that water quality in both around the base of this drill stem and then down again another 100 feet or so in the sediment and the water of the wetland. And the copper was very high in the water and also in the sediment in this wetland. So again, accidents happen, mistakes happen, the unexpected happens. Maybe they didn't expect this to be a hole that was hard to close, but it is impacting a wetland right now. And then lastly, at this site, we saw several of these, what we call artesian sites, where groundwater has enough force and enough pressure behind it that it just kind of shoots up out of the hole, and this could be just kind of trickling out of a drill stem, or it could be shooting out, or as in this lower picture, you see that kind of rubble around these downed posts, and it looks like they had tried to cement the hole, and maybe the pressure was so high it just busted that concrete up out of there. We had no records of DNR inspectors ever having been to this site, except for the year that it was drilled. So we don't know if this is something that happened the summer that we got there, or if it's been an ongoing problem. And again, it's something we saw at several sites. DNR had come out to this area and spent 3 days inspecting holes about a week before we went out there. We were out there for 5 days. We landed at every site we went to. We think DNR probably just overflew some of the sites with their helicopter and inspected from the air. They were aware of some of these artesian sites, but there were also ones that we ran across that they had not been aware of. So inspection is needs a little more work on finding some of these problem areas. And here I'm showing more artesian sites, or what I think are probably artesian sites. Drill stems are still in place. They haven't been cut off. And it looks like they have tried to weld plates and bolts onto this. And the only reason I can see for welding plates and bolts is if you've got high pressure water they're trying to contain. One of them had a valve, this one that's sitting to the lowest, furthest right. And, you know, we just went out and turned the valve and there was the water. And of course we measured the water quality. Of all the places, of all the artesian sites we saw where we took water quality and measured it, none of it was acid. It was all a neutral pH, but all of it had either metals or sodium or both. So there are definitely metals being moved into the environment from these sites. And again, it's something, it's not a walk-away solution. Who's going to be taking care of those? What's the reason behind why they haven't completely reclaimed those artesian sites? Are they things that the state is going to have to take care of forever, or are there different methods that can be employed to stop those artesian flows? I don't know what the reason is why those haven't been completely fixed yet. Now, in slide 23, I show a hole that was drilled in 2005. There's water around it. We have no idea if that water came from the rain. DNR had flown over this site again the week before we were there, and they said that it looks like it's just ponded rainwater, maybe some shallow groundwater. But they never take any samples. They never take any water samples or sediment samples, soil samples. They never even tested those cuttings. We don't even know if they knew that those drill cuttings were on the surface. If you collect a water sample and sediment sample from these sites, you'll know if it's rainwater or if it's water coming out of that pipe. And in this case, the water itself was rainwater, but at some point it had been artesian. Whether it still was or not, we don't know. But the sediment was very, very high in copper, and this is not an area where the mineralization is at the surface. So almost certainly it had come from that pipe at one time. We did see about half the sites we went to did have really good reclamation, and we were targeting areas that we knew had problems in the past, or we had reason to think were near water bodies, and we wanted to check whether they were problems. So certainly there were a lot of good reclamation was going on, but there were also problems that we need to learn from and learn to make sure we don't do those again. So slide 25, mitigation. I've already mentioned all of this. Don't discharge onto the surface if you're in a mineralized section of your hole. Line these sumps when you are in those. Settle the cuttings out and line sumps, and also keep records of where the waste disposal goes. The regulators weren't finding some of these because they were disposing of these drilling muds up to 1,000 feet away from the site. And you don't necessarily know where they are or where to look. Inspection needs to happen not only while they're drilling the holes, but also years later after closure, and sometimes many years later, to make sure that those drill holes are staying closed. Determine the cause behind the failures. That can help a lot in figuring out how to close the next set of holes, and also determine whether environmental harm is actually occurring or not. Some of these may look bad, but maybe there really isn't much harm in them. So that's some mitigation to start thinking about. For underground mining, I'm going to show just very briefly what a mine operation looks like. You start with, once you've done your exploration and you want to actually start a mine, you decide if it's going to be an open pit or tunnels. You start pulling this ore out, you blast the rock, you get it to the surface. A geologist says, okay, that rock has stuff good enough to mill. That stuff isn't. The stuff that isn't is what we call waste rock, and that starts to go into these large piles that can be eventually hundreds of feet high. The ore, the material that can go to the mill, gets processed, it gets ground up and submitted to different reagents. And again, that also has a waste product. Only a small amount of that actually goes to market. The rest goes into a waste product called tailings, mill tailings, which is similar to waste rock, but it has more mineralization, so it'll have more of the copper, more of the zinc. It'll have a lot more of the sulfides. So this is where we go back and talk about the geochemistry again. a lot of that waste rock that they have to get through to get to the ore will be that aluminum, silicon, oxygen, and not have so much of the sulfides. The material with the sulfides will end up in the tailings. So you might want to manage those differently because one may be much more likely to go acid and start this acid generation process. The end of the mine, you can put a lot of this material back into the tunnels, but you can't get it all back in the tunnels. So some of it's going to end up on the surface, and depending on the makeup of that material, you may need a water treatment plant, and we're seeing more and more sites that need water treatment plants that may end up going forever. They're what they call in perpetuity. On slide 30, I'm showing a picture of the Red Dog tailings facility. So this is what a tailings slurry looks like. It looks like a huge pond, discolored pond, but it's got beaches if you want to go hang on the beach. They're generally really toxic, and they're held back by dams, and there's been a lot of concern with the stability of those dams, especially if this material has to be held back for thousands of years. One way to reduce the risk of these facilities is to pull more of the water out. So if you pull some of the water out, you get this paste, like a toothpaste, and that's certainly something that can go back into these underground tunnels. Dry stack, you pull even more water out, and this is dry stack is eventually becomes a stable landform. The paste tails is not really a stable landform. It will there's enough water that it will move that material if it's not completely held back. You can also add cement to tailings and waste rock and put it back into the tunnel, so you have both physical and chemical stability. So one place that's used two different methods is POGO, and I'm showing this kind of busy slide, but you kind of ignore all of that except the two bottom boxes, the one that says paste backfill, 40%, and surface disposal, 60%. So again, it illustrates you can only get part of your material back into the tunnels. And another busy slide on slide 32 just shows some of the process. It's really an industrial process to deal with this waste. With this tailings waste and try to get it into any kind of form. Actually, even a slurry form is quite a industrial process. But you end up with two different products. At the POGO mine, you get what they call this filter cake, which becomes your dry stack tail surface storage, and then you get this paste pump where you pump this material back underground. And I've given the PDF where you can see a lot of this. And again, here's another picture of the POGO mine, and on the left it shows you what a dry stack actually looks like. And if you look very closely, you can see a large truck on one of the upper stacks to get a little bit of the idea of the scale. But you pack these into a valley so it's stabilized on a couple of different sides, and then you compact it with big equipment and try and get it as solid as possible. And then you can throw dirt and vegetation on top of it so it becomes part of the landscape. So a little cautionary tale, there's this mine in Washington State called the Buckhorn Mine. It was started in 2008, so it's what we call a modern mine. And it was supposed to be an economic and an environmental success story. They were going to go in and put these tunnels in. They first wanted a big open pit mine, and the community said no. They said, let's keep it a small footprint, so they agreed. They decided to just do tunnels, and they also agreed to take all the ore off-site. So there was no processing, there was no tailings. You didn't have to worry about slurry dam or paste tails or dry stack or anything else because all that material was taken off-site. So the only thing they had was waste rock, and they could put a lot of that back in the tunnels. So the only impact was from mining itself. So the problem that happened here was they were unable to keep control of the groundwater. They just did not understand the hydrology of the site well enough. So within the first year, they had a lot of violations of their permit. They had to change their water treatment plant. In their second year, they had 91 violations of their permit. And to this day, as of 2017, they have still been unable to contain the groundwater. and they're still trying to figure out what to do. They're actually in closure. It was only a 7-year mine that was planned, so they're kind of on schedule. But the short-term mine has now caused a permanent problem that they don't know how to solve. And a lot of metals are entering the creek. So the take-home from here is you've got to understand the hydrology really, really well, and you've got to be able to back off and stop the mine if you get into situations where you don't understand the hydrology. One of the things that had been suggested was as you put these tunnels in, and for the ones that were above the water table, that you should be cementing the tunnel walls, what they call shotcrete. And that makes sure that any of these sulfides on the tunnel walls does not start generating acid. And they did that for 1 year, and then they didn't do it again. There are a lot of other things that they could have done that could have helped a little bit, but again, it was mostly understanding the hydrology that they had a problem with. This particular site, there was a stakeholder group that worked with them, and part of the agreement with the stakeholder group was that the mining company would share their monitoring data. So all of the water quality data that they collect is available online, and the link is on the slide there if you want to look at how that can be done as a model of how to share water quality data between what the mining company is doing and the community. And the citizens themselves are also taking water quality data and doing other monitoring, and that link is there as well. So those are some ways that communities and companies can have agreements and work together a little bit. Another thing that was innovative that particular group did was they had an agreement which was a legal court-ordered agreement. Well, it was legal, ended up being upheld in court later, that any of the water that came off the mine site had to be the same quality as the streams it went into. And that may be unique in the nation. And that was, the mining company has now said we're having a really hard time doing that, and the court said that's a shame because that's a legal requirement now, is you agreed to this. So it is something you can set up, and it means they maybe have to work a little bit harder to try to get the water quality the same as the streams that are going into. Because that is different than meeting the criteria of a permit. Permit can change what levels of water quality you're required to meet. So slide 37, almost to the end here, just looking at more mitigations. There's both physical and chemical barriers, physical and chemical stability that you want to achieve. This can be through simply separating the material from water and air through liners and covers, pumping cement into fractures as you encounter those. Slurry walls it's a cement curtain that you pump down between a potential contaminant site at a pit or a tunnel and the local groundwater. So there's several things you can do. The one thing I think I didn't really talk about was this acid-generating rock. If you get it underwater, it stops the acid generation process, or it slows it down quite a bit. And that's why slurries are very popular, is then the material is under a water cover. Again, the problem with that then is you're risking having to keep a dam on site for thousands of years or forever. And so it's kind of a balancing act of managing the chemical stability and the physical stability sometimes. On the next slide, I show a couple of different materials that are used as liners and covers. And then the takeaway is simply the big parts are understand the geology really, really well, and understand the geology of both your ore, but also your waste rock and other materials that you have to move and encounter in that environment. You've got to understand the hydrology, the groundwater as it moves through the bedrock underground. That's a safety issue. How it moves through the tunnels, where you may have a risk of creating cracks and fractures as you blast, and whether those can end up as a conduit to the surface. There's a lot about the hydrology that absolutely needs to be understood to keep contaminants from moving off-site. Plan for accidents, plan your backup systems, and then continually monitor, inspect, and share data. And that's all I got.